You ever been in love, Spider-Man?
Yeah. Yeah, I have.
Hey there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike, and welcome to another Omnibus review. Today we've got the anthology of love stories that is the Colours Omnibus. Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and Captain America White, all by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale. And there's a lot to love about these stories. So I'll be taking you through the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through where I can share some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on these stories. So if you enjoy the video at any point, you know how to show it. And as always, feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comments below. But with that out of the way, go grab your emotions and let's check out some of these stories. So starting out as always with the dust jacket here. It's a pretty simple design. You just get a little piece of art from each of the stories in here by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, the iconic duo that by this point would have already brought us the legendary story that are run on Batman Long Halloween and Dark Victory and Haunted Night and all those wonderful books. Definitely a powerful pair. There's the spine. Interesting about this omnibus, I'm not sure if any other omnibus is like this, but it doesn't actually have the omnibus logo that's typical of these books. And this book is listed as an omnibus, but I'm not sure why it doesn't match the spine design of other Marvel omnibuses. But anyway, in here we have a cover price of 100 US, 127 Canadian. And as I mentioned, in here we collect the Colours series of stories that Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale worked on. So Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and Captain America White. Let's flip it over here and show you under the dust jacket. And once again, similar to the front of the dust jacket, we do get a little bit of artwork from each of the stories in here. Oh, and I forgot to mention that dust jacket. I don't believe there are any variant covers. I think this is the only one I've seen offered on this omnibus. But, you know, maybe if this book gets a reprint, they might offer a direct market cover in the future. You never know. There is the spine. And there is the back. Let me actually open that up, see if we can get a better look. There you go. Very nice. I think you'll definitely appreciate Tim Sale's artwork in here. Amazing, amazing artist. But anyway, let's take a flip through and I can talk a little bit more about the stories. Okay, so let's dive in here a little bit. There's the lovely bookend pages we get. And we start off with an intro by Tim Sale, actually, the artist on all of these stories. And he's essentially communicating that this series, this Colours series, each story is themed around, it's essentially a love letter to somebody that the hero has lost in their life. And he talks a little bit about Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, and Hulk Gray. And this is from 2014, so Captain America White actually hadn't come out. Now you might think we're going to jump into Daredevil Yellow first, but no. I'm going to take you in the order that I read these books. I didn't read this from front to back. I read it in order of, well, I guess my least favorite character to my most favorite character. So I actually started with Captain America White. So let's dive in here first. We have an intro here by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who were the screenwriters of the Captain America MCU movies. So they get to offer a little bit of their insight between the relationship between Steve and Bucky Barnes, talking a little bit about the bond between soldiers and how these two characters understand each other so well. Captain America White was the last story to be published in the Colours series. Most of them came out in the early 2000s, but Captain America White, it started in 2008, but it had some production delays and it didn't get finished until I think 2015 or something like that. So it was the most separate from the other titles. But anyway, I mentioned that each story in this series is kind of themed around love, but it doesn't necessarily have to be romantic love, because this is themed around the relationship between Captain America, Steve Rogers, and his sidekick, Bucky Barnes. And this whole thing is essentially recounting a mission they undertook during World War II against the Red Skull. And it just focuses on, Captain America first meeting Bucky, training him, taking him on these missions, and how, some of his regrets, honestly, because eventually Bucky would meet his untimely death in the war, and then much, much later come back as the Winter Soldier. But they, delve into their relationship and, how Cap may have done things differently, and just the differences between them too. Even little things like how Bucky's more experienced in romantic relationships than Cap is. The art in here is really, really excellent by Tim Sale. There's some continuity errors here and there that I noticed, but nothing major. They're going on this mission. They're behind enemy lines. They meet up with like a resistance group, and well, I guess here's where you notice that Jeph Loeb's not always the best at writing international characters. But yeah, I started with Captain America White because, I don't know, I'm not as interested in Captain America as some of the other characters here. As far as what the color means, I'm not actually sure. I haven't figured this one out yet. In terms of white, you could argue it's for the sake of patriotism, like red, white, and blue. Or you could argue that white is technically an amalgamation of all the colors in one. So maybe you could argue that that represents sort of Steve Rogers, the super soldier, and how he's the amalgamation of everything good. They really tried to make the perfect soldier, so to speak. I don't know. It's up to interpretation. But yeah, even though I'm not super interested in the character of Captain America himself, the thing I enjoyed about this story the most is definitely the artwork by Tim Sale. Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale also worked on The Long Halloween, which is my favorite Batman story. So it's just really nice to see his style being applied to other characters and other stories. Now, every single one of these stories actually comes with a sketchbook at the end. And in this case, Captain America White comes with an interview with Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, and they talk a little bit about the reasoning behind the choice of colors in the other series, which I'll get to in a bit. They talk a little bit about Cap's romantic relationships, the World War II setting. They poke a little bit of fun at Tim Sale and how Jeph was making him draw vehicles all the time, which Tim Sale apparently wasn't a huge fan of. And they touch a little bit on Ed Brubaker's run, which would have been big around this time. But yeah, let's move on to the next story. Now, after Captain America White, the next story I read was Hulk Gray. We have an intro here by Mary Severin, and she's talking a little bit about the art of the Hulk. What would you do if you met the Hulk? Questions like that. She talks about how Tim Sale's version of the Hulk actually reminds her of the Incredible Bulk, which is like a parody version of the Hulk. Now, this story is centered around a therapy session with that Bruce Banner is having with Doc Samson, and he's recounting the early days, or essentially he's recounting his origin story of becoming the Hulk. So this flashes back to the accident and those initial 24 hours or 48 hours following that, how General Ross was hunting the Hulk down, and how Hulk just wants to make his way back to Betty Ross. And that's kind of where the theme of love sets in with this story. Now it's called Hulk Gray because, as you Hulk fans may know, that Hulk wasn't always green. His original color was actually gray, and then they switched to green later. So Hulk's drawn in this like really dark ink wash the entire time. They actually keep him gray as, I guess, an homage to those early days. But also the color gray is kind of depicting how the world works here, because General Ross, he views the world very much in a black and white way. You know, Hulk is bad and Hulk must be captured. There's no two ways about it. But Hulk himself is a very gray character. Yes, he's big and powerful and scary, but he's not evil. He's got nuance to him. You know, early on in the story, he tracks Betty down and he just wants to be reunited with her, but the military doesn't want to leave him alone. He's just this tortured creature, really. And this story will also go into his first encounter with Iron Man, too, which is a little bit of a retcon that they do here. They're kind of cheeky with it. I haven't read the original Hulk comics myself, so I don't know how accurate this is to those comics, but it definitely feels that way, and it dives into Bruce's relationship with Rick Jones as well, the kid he was trying to save before the accident. And there's just a lot of really nice scenes in here, like this one where Hulk is tending to Betty after an injury, and there's this thunderstorm that's going on, and he's basically just a lumbering beast. He just gets angry at the storm, and Betty has to calm him down. And, they reused this scene in the 2008 Hulk movie with the MCU movie with Edward Norton. Because, right, I forgot to mention, this story came out in 2003. So it's cool to see, scenes like that were later reused in movies. Now, the sketchbook you get for Hulk Gray is a little different. You again get input from Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, and they're talking about how they view the Hulk, how he's essentially just an angry 4-year-old, and you can expect him to react and behave that way. And of course, the connection to Frankenstein's monster, which, lots of inspiration for the Hulk came from there. They're talking about how they really wanted to exaggerate Hulk's strength in this story. Tim Sale's talking about how he wanted to draw parallels to the 2003 Hulk movie that was coming out around this time, where Hulk was entirely computer generated. So Tim Sale wanted to kind of convey that feeling too, and that's why he drew Hulk in this sort of gray ink wash, and that sort of gave the computer generated feel, if you will. They're talking about how they really wanted to make Hulk feel larger than life, how he's breaking out of the panel and out of the page. But what's really interesting too is they talk about how Iron Man is like the opposite side of the spectrum of science, whereas, Hulk was turned into this big lumbering creature. Iron Man used science and technology to turn himself into like a shining knight, right? A more traditional hero, so he kind of represents the opposite side of what science can do. All right, now we can jump back to the beginning of the book, because the next story I read is Daredevil Yellow. Here we get an intro by Stan the Man Lee, and he's really hyping up the story here. He's talking about how good of a time he had with Daredevil Yellow and what each of the issues meant to him, and just how cool the covers were. Because if you pay attention to the covers, you'll see how it features like Matt at a very distinct part of his life, and then Daredevil's like this figure overlooking in the background. It's really, really well done. So here we are, Daredevil Yellow. Now, why yellow, you may ask? Well, as some of you may know, the original suit that Daredevil wore was actually yellow and red. So because this takes place earlier on in Daredevil's life, you actually get to see him wearing the yellow suit for a good part of this book. But yellow also represents, it's a color that represents cowardice and fear. And, you know, Daredevil is the man without fear, so it ties into that. But it's also part of the colors that his father would wear when he was a boxer. So there's a lot of tie-ins, a lot of meanings you can draw from the color yellow. But, you know, the love theme of this story is focused around a few things. Matt is writing a letter to Karen, actually, because he's been reminded of her, and he wants to write her a letter to get all of his emotions out. But it's also delving into the love that Matt had for his father and what happened there. And, you know, the lessons he was able to draw from his father. You know, it's not about how you get knocked down. It's about how you get up. You know, instilling into him that sort of relentless perseverance that's synonymous with Matt. But, you know, the early issue kind of recaps the incident with his father, how he was a boxer who was told by the mafia to throw a fight, but he didn't. And then he was killed. And then, you know, Matt decides to don the suit and track down his father's killer. But there's a lot of other things that happen in this story. I'm trying to keep the details vague. Each of these stories are only 6 issues, so I don't want to spoil too much for you guys, but it's also delving into Matt meeting Karen Page for the first time and how he was setting up his law firm with his partner, Foggy Nelson. But there's a lot of interesting things that happen in this story. They get an unexpected client who appears and complicates things. You'll get to see Matt duke it out with Electro, who's just classic villain. He's one of my favorite Spidey villains. I don't know, something about the power of electricity has always been super cool to me. But yeah, see how each of the covers have, like, you know, a very human moment happening, but then Daredevil overlooking in the background. Super duper cool. And one thing that's done really, really well is how Matt behaves around Foggy and Karen versus how he is as Daredevil. He's very warm and, you know, caring when he's around Foggy and Karen, but he's got this smug confidence when he's Daredevil, and that's reflected so well by Tim Sale's artwork too. The way he just flings himself off of rooftops and has such grace and elegance. But you really get the sense of how he felt about Karen and how he could feel, you know, she made him feel vulnerable. He felt vulnerable around Karen. There's a great quote in here where he's like, "You named me the man without fear. And I'm beginning to realize that my greatest fear is living in a world without you." It's really, really heartfelt. And Matt Hollingsworth's colors in here are to be praised as well. He's got this, the colors that he adds are really, really well done because they've all got this watercolory look to them. It's really, really well done. Now, the sketchbook of Daredevil Yellow is pretty simple, but we get some insights into the creative process here, how Jeph Loeb will have a script and how he'll describe how he wants the panel to flow, and then Tim Sale will go in and draw it all, and you know how they have a back and forth. Sometimes Sale would add something that or change something about the script that Jeph Loeb, you know, didn't have, but then they decide to keep, and just how magnificently he can draw Matt parkouring around the environment like that. Because that's the other theme about love in here. It also, you know, portrays the love that Matt feels for his city. And Tim Sale, he said in his intro that he could definitely relate to that, his love for New York. But yeah, here we have just some more bits of the creative process, a little bit of a sketch gallery, and then we move on to the next story. And this is the final story that I read. Spider-Man Blue, saving my favorite character for last. And this story came out just after Daredevil Yellow, which came out in 2001, but Spider-Man Blue was coming out towards the tail end of 2001 and mostly in 2002. We got an intro here by John Romita Sr., iconic, legendary Silver Age artist. And he's talking about how going through this story felt like going through a photo album, and how every now and then he really feels touched by a story, and Spider-Man Blue is one of them. And why is that? Well, that's because Spider-Man Blue takes place during the events of Amazing Spider-Man 40 to 49, something like that. Stories that were coming out in the late 60s when John Romita Sr. was the penciler. Now, they play a little bit with continuity. The events are shifted around a bit, but generally they line up pretty well. It's Valentine's Day, and Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he wants to talk to Gwen. You know, he goes up to the bridge where she died. He leaves a rose, and that whole thing just reminds me very much of Batman the Animated Series, how Bruce would always go to Crime Alley and leave a rose for his parents. And, you know, you can very much see the blue theme in the artwork here, but it's pretty obvious. It's blue, it's winter time. You know, Spider-Man is feeling blue, reminiscing about Gwen. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, blue is also a part of Spider-Man's colors, so you could argue that's how that ties in as well. But then we flash back here to the time that Green Goblin found out about Spider-Man's identity, found out who he was. And I haven't compared the dialogue to see if it actually matches up to those issues, but man, it definitely feels like it. The dialogue that Jeph wrote for this story really feels like it could fit really well into that Silver Age. And another thing you'll notice is the artwork. This isn't exactly like Tim Sale's traditional style. He's purposefully trying to homage John Romita Sr.'s style. Everything from the webs to the designs of the characters. Like, yeah, you can see the way he draws the webs is that like old school crisscross pattern that artists would draw. It just looks like a net. Yeah, so cool. I mean, oh, look at that. This was definitely my favorite story in the entire omnibus. And that says a lot, because I was really enjoying the other stories too. Like, even the Captain America one, even though that one was the one I was least excited for. And I was really surprised how much I enjoyed the Hulk story too. But then Daredevil Yellow was so amazing, and you know, it just kept getting better and better. And that's what I would recommend if you pick up this omnibus, if you ever get the chance. Read it in the order of your, you know, least favorite to most favorite characters. I think that way it'll just get better and better for you. But then issue 2 here is really fantastic too. You'll get some really excellent Spidey writing in here. Because this is around the time that Spider-Man encountered the Rhino. And man, this is the kind of Spider-Man I love, man. He's quippy, he's confident, he's smart, you know, because he does have a science background.
Spider-Man is a scientist?
He ends up going back with Kurt Connors to find a way to defeat the Rhino and get around that, you know, that basically that suit of armor that he has. And, you know, it's just so cool going back, because, yeah, this is exactly what happened in those original stories. I feel like I have a really interesting perspective because I've read those original Silver Age stories. So I remember all this stuff. It's just cool seeing it with a modern twist. But yeah, you know, super confident as as Spider-Man, but then he gets pretty flustered around Gwen and Mary Jane, and ultimately Peter Parker, he just cares for his Aunt May. He's written so well here. Now, granted, they were using the original stories for inspiration, so it makes sense that Spidey is written well because he was written well in those original stories. But again, it's just nice to see. So other stories you'll get from around that time, back when MJ first appeared, the fight with the lizard that Spider-Man had around this time, the whole thing about him moving in with Harry. The appearance of the second Vulture around this time, Blackie Drago. Yeah, and this entire time there's this mysterious figure who's lurking in the shadows and observing Spider-Man. And if you're familiar with the original stories, you'll probably be able to guess who this eventually ends up being. But man, even though you kind of know where the stories are going, if you've read these original stories before, this is just such a good Spider-Man story, and a lot of really good emotions too, because Peter's recording at this time of year, he said he just thinks of Gwen, and he's recording all these voice notes, just essentially talking to Gwen and reminiscing about all these stories. So that's why it takes place in the past. But yeah, really good storytelling here. And finally, the sketchbook that you get at the back of Spider-Man Blue is probably the most simple. They're talking a little bit about the cover designs. They go over how apparently Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale had an argument over whether or not they should have a cover that primarily focuses on Aunt May, and how a bunch of people thought that was a bad idea and they didn't get to use it, but then they reused it for something else. I can't remember what. But yeah, you can see like the comparisons between the original artwork and then Tim Sale's interpretation. Just so well done. And they also go over some convention sketches that Tim Sale did, featuring various moments from this series. So that's nice to see too. All right, but that actually leaves us in a good spot to talk about build quality. We have 664 pages in this omnibus. The eye is a little bit on the smaller side, but still not bad. The binding is kind of stiff in this book, but I never really noticed that it was that much of a problem. So actually that's perfect. There's a spread page. You can see there's not too much gutter loss, but just a little bit. Didn't really cause too many problems though, as I said. The book lays over really well. I never noticed any page bleed at all. The pages actually felt really good. There's no page numbers or anything in this omnibus, but I didn't really feel it was necessary. Just because this is an anthology and each story is only 6 issues, it just felt really easy to keep track of. So I wasn't really worried about that. Pretty happy with the build quality. But just to wrap up here with some closing thoughts, honestly, it's really simple. If you're interested in any of these 4 characters, I highly recommend picking this book up. But I recommend reading the stories in the order of your least to most favorite character. So if Cap is your favorite character, save that story for last. If Hulk is your favorite character, save that story for last. I do think you'll get the most out of it that way. Unfortunately, this book is out of print at the moment, but Marvel has been releasing gallery editions of these stories, which are a bit of a wider and taller format. So if you're interested in any of these, that's also maybe a good way to pick this up and experience them. But honestly, even Tim Sale's artwork alone makes this totally worth it. Especially the Spidey story, where he's paying homage to John Romita Sr.'s classic Silver Age style. But also, if you're a fan of Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's other work, like The Long Halloween, for example, totally recommend picking these stories up. But that's been my review of the Colours Omnibus. Let me know what you thought about this book or any of the stories inside. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll be happy to help out. But thank you so much for joining me today. Hope to catch you in another video real soon. So you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.